All right, this morning we're going to be continuing to look at how that afflictions are made beneficial. Afflictions are made beneficial. And the first one I want to take you to is Job chapter 23. Job chapter 23. And the first thought I want you to have is that they're made beneficial in testing and exhibiting our sincerity to God. In testing and exhibiting our sincerity to God. Now look at Job 23. Go down, if you will, to verse number 10 first. Job 23 and 10. But he knoweth the way that I take. Isn't that something good? God knows where you're at, where you've been, and he even knows where you're going. Thank God for a personal, all-present, all-powerful God that knows us. He knows where we're at in life. He knows the circumstances and the trials, the afflictions that we're going through, and he is testing us to see that we are his and we are sincere. Look what he says. He says, he knoweth the way that I take. When he hath tried me, I shall come forth as what? Gold. My foot hath held his steps. His way have I kept and not declined. So Job is exhibiting his sincerity by living what he is professing. I'm following after God. I'm doing that which is right. And God may be trying me, but I know that when I come out on the other end, I will be better, refined as gold. So Job understood the concept of being afflicted and tried. Now he's being tried by his friends, that's for sure. They're pronouncing him guilty in their court, in their estimation. They're all around him circling kind of like buzzards, waiting for him to die and saying, you've done something wrong, Job. You've sinned. But Job says no. He says, I've not turned. I know the way that I've been. I know the way I'm going. And I know that when I come through this trial, I shall be as gold. And indeed, he did. He came out better off at the end than he was at the beginning. All right, now look at Psalm 66 and 10. Psalm 66 and 10. Psalm 66 and 10. For thou, O God, hast what? Proved us. And what's that mean, to prove something? We discussed that in Sunday school this morning about David. Remember, King Saul offered to let him borrow his armor to go down and battle Goliath. But what did David say? I can't wear this. I haven't proved it. In other words, Saul's armor wouldn't have fit David anyway. It probably swallowed him whole. Because David, remember, was still a young, ruddy youth. Saul was a grown man. As a matter of fact, Saul was a head taller than most of the average Jew at that time. So there's no way that armor would have fit. But this idea of proving, it means that God is doing some examination and some testing. And at the end it says, O God has proved us, thou hast tried us as silver is tried. Now how do you try silver? Exactly, you heat it up. You make things hot around it, and it will begin to boil, almost boil, and all the dross and the impurities will lift up, and then that refiner will take a skimmer and skin that dross off, and what you're left with is a more purified product. or in this case, purified silver. So he uses the example of gold, and if you don't like gold, some people don't like yellow gold. They like silver. But God has a way of refining us to make us better. Remember, it's not designed just to melt us and to disintegrate us into nothing. It's designed to improve us and to make us better. And our Christian service and walk is supposed to do that. Our Christian service is supposed to make us draw closer unto Christ. We call that sanctification. We know that when we are saved, we're sanctified. But we're not done with sanctification until the day that the Lord comes back and we're changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, and we're made to be like unto Him. Then our sanctification is complete. Then we're perfect. Then we're holy. But until then, the whole path of life is designed to make us better at being Christ-like, better at being a Christian. So God's not just taking the old bullwhip out and cracking it on you and saying, look at that. No. He does all these things to us. He works all these things for our good, for our benefit, and for His purposes. So God does test us, and He does want to see whether we're sincere or not. Now look at Job. Had Job sinned when he got tried? No. Remember what God said? In all these things, Job what? Sinned not. Job had not sinned. Job was living a good life. Now, granted, he wasn't perfect. None of us are perfect. But Job was trying his best to live right. As a matter of fact, he was even trying to pray ahead for his youngins, wasn't he? He was praying ahead for them that if they did sin, that God would forgive them. So he's praying ahead, and that's a recommendation for us to pray ahead for our children. Who knows, the Lord can use that to save them. So here he says that God has proved us and has tried us as silver is tried. Now look what it says in verse 11. Thou broughtest us into the net. Thou laidst affliction upon our loins. Thou hast caused men to ride over our heads. We went through the fire and through water. But now look at the last phrase. Boy, it was tough, he says. We went through the fire and the water. And then look at the result. But thou broughtest us out into a wealthy place. There's benefits that come from affliction. All right, and then one more look at Proverbs 17. Proverbs 17. Verse number 3. Proverbs 17, verse 3. The fining pot is for silver, and the furnace for gold. He says, well, there's specific things for specific things to happen. But look what it says God does. But the Lord does what? Trieth the hearts. God knows how to work on you. Now, sometimes it works from the flesh inward, but most time the best trials will work inward out. Now, yes, sometimes God uses an affliction, physical affliction, to get a hold of us. God uses different means and methods, but the purpose is God is trying our heart to weed out that which is impure in us. He's removing those things that cause us to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. He's removing the roots of bitterness. He's removing that sin, that prevalent sin that tends to happen in our lives. He's removing those causes that cause us problems to benefit us. Just like the grapevines or the apple trees, if you don't go out and prune them, what happens? You end up with just a bunch of branches, don't you? You've got to prune them wisely in order for them to produce fruit. And we know that God indeed prunes us wisely so that we indeed will benefit and produce fruit. What is the Christian responsibility once he's saved? But to go forth from the church, go out into the world and to preach the gospel, be a witness and a light, and invite men, women, boys, and girls to come to Christ and to come in to the church. All right, there's another one. It also, afflictions are made beneficial in trying our faith and obedience. Look at Genesis 22. In trying our faith and obedience. Genesis 22. Verses 1 and 2. This was a test that was above all others, I believe, but as a shadow and type of what God was doing for us in the future. Look what it says. And it came to pass, verse 1 and 2, I'm going to read. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abraham and said unto him, Abraham, and he said, Behold, here I am. Notice, Abraham knows how to respond, doesn't he? Here I am, Lord. I'm listening. And he said, Take now thy son, thine only son Isaac. Now notice what he adds here. Whom thou lovest. Remember, Isaac was the promised child. Isaac was told through Isaac that Israel would become a great nation. So there's great love there for the father, for his son. And you get thee into the land of Moriah and offer him there for a burnt offering upon one of the mountains, which I will tell thee of. Now notice verse 3, his response. And Abraham rose up early in the morning and saddled his ass and took 2 of his young men with him and Isaac his son and clave the wood for the burnt offering and rose up and went unto the place which God had told him. Now there's a real trial. Abraham had to be willing to offer up his own son. And God tried him. Now notice what it says here in verse number 15. And the angel of the Lord called unto Abraham out of heaven the second time and said, By myself have I sworn, saith the Lord, for because thou hast done this thing, and hast not withheld thy son, thine only son, that in blessing I will bless thee, and in multiplying I will multiply thy seed as the stars of heaven, and as the sand which is upon the seashore, and thy seed shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in thy seed shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because thou hast obeyed my voice. Notice the benefits that came from his obedience. Now, he wasn't looking for those benefits. He received those benefits, not knowing that was what going to be the result. But he was faithful and obedient to take Isaac up. He had Isaac laid there bound. He's lifted up the knife and ready to strike. And in his heart, he had done it. In his heart, he was going to do it. And the angel stayed his hand. Now, you can just imagine Isaac. He said, well, what are we going to sacrifice? And what did God do? Here's the ram. So in trying our faith, and you can look over, when you get time, over at Hebrews 11, how it says that in verse number 17 about Abraham. Now look, if you will, at Exodus 15. Exodus 15. Recall here in Exodus, Israel has left and gone out into a place that's kind of tough. God leads them out to this place. And look at verse number 23. So Moses brought Israel from the Red Sea and then went out into the wilderness of Shur. And they went 3 days in the wilderness. Now notice this phrase, and found no water. Now they're in a hard spot. There's over 1 million plus people. Haven't got anything to drink. Now can you imagine how much water 1 million plus people could drink? Now remember, they got their herds with them too, and them herds got to drink. So 1 million plus people, plus all the camels and all the donkeys and all the livestock they've got, has to drink too. You got to have water to live. But now look what happens. He says, and when they came to Marah, they could not drink of the waters of Marah, for they were bitter. Therefore the name of it was called Marah. And what does bitter water mean? But that it's poison. They couldn't drink it. And it says, and the people murmured against Moses, saying, what shall we drink? Now, what does that mean? They murmured against Moses. Grumbling, growling, belly aching, and backstabbing. All those things. They weren't happy. Oh, it's all about me, Moses. I deserve to have water to drink. You owe it to me, Moses, to give me water. Where's my water? You see how spoiled they are in their minds? The people murmured. Now you read that phrase, about every step Moses took, what was them people doing? Murmuring, backbiting, complaining, trying to conspire to overthrow, etc., etc. Every single week, something new would be murmuring against Moses. Now, can you imagine Moses? A couple of times he did get upset, and it cost him, didn't it? Remember that time he was supposed to speak to the rock, instead he struck it? That cost him a trip into the promised land. He ended up dying in the mountains before they crossed into the promised land. So here's another point. Now it said the people murmured, and he cried unto the Lord, and the Lord showed him a tree, which when he had cast into the waters were made what? Sweet. That means drinkable, tasted good. There he made for them a statute and an ordinance. Now notice this last phrase. And there he what? Proved them. He knew what they were going to do. And they confirmed by their murmuring. And said, if thou wilt diligently hearken to the voice of the Lord thy God, and wilt do that which is right in his sight, and will give statutes, I will put none of these diseases upon thee, which I have brought upon the Egyptians. For I am the Lord that healeth thee. And they came to Elim, where were 12 wells of water, and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water. Not only did he provide water for them, he made bitter water sweet, and then when they camped, they had plenty of water and they had shade because there was palm trees there as well. So think about that. And their testing and their trials, God proved them, and boy, they fell short, didn't they? We all fall short. We all aren't successful in our trials every time, are we? We all come short of the glory of God. But the good thing about it is the God that we serve is a patient God. He's a long-suffering God, and will forgive us if we will confess our sin. He will forgive us of our sins and our trespasses. And then I want you to see another one while you're back this direction. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 8. It serves to humble us. Deuteronomy chapter 8. And go down to verse 3. Deuteronomy 8 and 3. We had this thought this morning in Sunday school. Now I'll start in verse 2. Deuteronomy 8:2 says, and thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these how long? 40 years where? Now, you think about it. Have you ever looked at the map of where Israel went? And they got the journeys of Israel tracked, and it looks like a big zigzag puzzle. God, remember, wouldn't allow them to cross over the Jordan because of their sin there with the 12 spies that came out, and only Joshua and Caleb gave a good report. The other 10 said, nah, we can't go there. And then Moses said, well, you're not going. And then they said, well, we think we'll go. And that didn't work either, did it? So they went out into the wilderness for 40 years. And guess what happened to all them murmurers, backbiters, and complainers in that 40 years? They all died in the wilderness, not having set a foot on that promised land. Now notice this. He says, thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness. Now notice this. To what? Humble thee, and to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldst keep his commandments. And he humbled thee, suffered thee to hunger, and fed thee with manna which thou knewest not, neither did thy fathers know, that he might make thee know that man doth not live by bread only, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord. Thy raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Now think about the blessings that they had. Their clothes didn't wear out. Their shoes never wore out. They had water. They had food. They had manna. Didn't they complain about that too, didn't they? Yeah, they had manna and they got tired of it and said, we want some meat. God choked them on quail meat. But you see, God will test our faith and obedience sometimes to see how we're going to respond. Now, God already knows, but He wants us to know how we respond in the tough part. And then He also uses it to purify us. I want you to look at this. Look at Isaiah chapter 1. This will be the last point. Isaiah chapter 1. And go, if you will, down to verse 25 and 26. Isaiah chapter 1, verse 25 and 26. This is the Lord speaking. And I will turn my hand upon thee, and purely purge away thy dross, and take away all thy tin, and I will restore thy judges as at the first, and thy counselors as at the beginning. Afterward thou shalt be called the city of righteousness, the what? Faithful city. See, God had to restore them, didn't He? The good part about that removal was that God promised to bring them back. The good part about the removal was that God used that to bring them back to Him. And under Ezra and Nehemiah and under Queen Esther and all of those circumstances, God used those circumstances to refine them, to make them turn back to Him, to lean upon Him and depend upon Him for their protection, for their care, and for bringing them back to the promised land and then restoring the lands to their former glory. Think about that this morning. All right, let's all stand. Let's go to the Lord in prayer, and let's all